Good afternoon, folks. So we're just waiting for a few of the committee members to show up and we'll get started. Just bear with us. Thank you. All right, folks, we do have quorum. Good afternoon. My name is Tony Mancini, and welcome to the Environment Sustainability Standing Committee. It is September the 7th, and it's a few minutes after 1 o'clock. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First thing I'd like to do is acknowledge that we are on the land of the Mi'kmaq people, and here in Nova Scotia and HRM, we are all treaty people. Acknowledge the committee members, Councillor Lovelace, Councillor Cuddle, Councillor Daigle Gammon. Thank you very much. I'm sure that others will arrive here shortly. We wanted to look at approval of minutes from April 6, 2023 and July 6, 2023.
It's Stoddard, not Cuddle.
Oh, did I say Cuddle? Oh, well, let's see if they're paying attention. There. Catherine Morris, good to see you. Minutes, could we have someone move the minutes, please? Okay, whoever was there. And Councillor Daigle Gammon, thank you. Second by Councillor Lovelace. All those in favor? We now have approved minutes. Number 3, approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Any additions, deletions, Madam Clerk?
No additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Thank you, Councillor. And second by Councillor Stoddard. All those in favor? We now have an agenda. Fantastic. Is there any business arising out of the minutes? Seeing none. Call for declaration of conflict of interests. Seeing none. And then we have motions of reconsideration, motion of rescission, consideration of deferred business, notice of table matters, all none. And then we're looking at correspondence, petitions and delegations. Madam Clerk, do we have any correspondence?
Correspondence was received for item 1311 and was circulated to all members of the committee.
Thank you. What about petitions?
No petitions were received from the clerk's office.
Any petitions from the committee? Seeing none. Fantastic. Now we're coming to 10.3, which is presentations. We have 2 presentations today. And first is from our friends at Nova Scotia Power, proposed grid scale battery project in the Spider Lake area. Welcome, come forward. I believe we have Susan. We have 2 presenters. Who's Susan? Susan, welcome, Susan. And if you introduce your colleague, and welcome to the Environment Committee. That's fantastic. Do you have your slide deck up and ready to go?
Perfect. We do. And this is my colleague, Deborah McClellan. She's the project manager for this proposed development.
Oh, fantastic. Well, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. The way that this works is you give your presentation, and at the end of your presentation, the committee members, if they wish, can ask questions. So thanks very much. The floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the group today. We're very excited to share information on this proposed development. We've met with a few members already, including Councillor Daigle Gammon, so some of this may be familiar. We also met with Mayor Savage and Councillor Russell on this as well. So I'm just going to quickly set the stage for this proposed development. So we all know that we're in the midst of a pretty historic clean energy transition in our province. So these proposed projects are a very important step in that transition. So through our integrated resource planning process, we know that a mix of energy solutions is needed and will be required to achieve government's environmental targets, which includes phasing out coal by 2030 and also reaching 80% renewables. So we're excited to share information about the benefits of these projects and why this location in particular was chosen. And just for the sake of time, I am going to skip through a few of these slides as Deborah will kind of touch on these points, but we want to get to the information that's quite relevant, which is the location of this proposed project. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Deborah.
Hey, thank you, Susan. So you're seeing the location at It's actually on off Waverly Road. The area is Spider Lake, so it is directly off Waverly Road. And there's an existing switching station there that was constructed in 2015. So essentially, the proposed battery facility, it's about equivalent size to the existing switching station, and it would be directly beside it. So there'd be a transformer that goes in the existing substation, and that connects to the proposed battery facility. So that just gives a rough idea. There'll be some renderings later on that provide a little bit better of a feel for the look of the site. For this particular location, it's one of 3 proposed locations in Nova Scotia. The size is 50 megawatts, 4-hour battery, because it has a certain duration that it would last when running at full capacity. That's about the same size as a small combustion turbine, so just to give the feel for, it's about equivalent to a fast start unit. So the location here, there's a number of great features about it. One being that it's within HRM, where our load center is, and a lot of the grid services that this would provide are very helpful. It has a 138 kV transmission line. The size of the facility, it would need to interconnect to that size of a transmission line, so it's transmission interconnected, not distribution level. So you may think it could be connected into a community, maybe providing backup. That's not the main purpose of these batteries. It's really to provide grid services, store renewable energy when there's high production and low demand, and then we can dispatch that generation at different times when we have a higher need on the system. And then for it actually provides many other services, not just the straight up capacity. There's frequency response, which supports the whole grid, also local voltage stabilization, so many functions with a very versatile asset. And it's very fast responding, so we have less than a 200 millisecond response time, so it can act very quick if there's a disturbance on the grid. We also have a fair amount of land in the area. It requires a fairly small footprint, so it meets that criteria as well. So that's kind of the highlights of the location. If you want to skip to the next slide, that just summarizes those features I was going over. Wanted to highlight a couple of aspects in particular about safety and environment. So we're looking at safety and environment at the very early stages of any project design, development, and even screening the sites. So we would have looked at a number of different locations, and the first folks that are out for the site visits when we're seeing if a site is suitable or not would be one of our environment team members, our environmental specialist, as well as our T&D engineering team to look, is there enough area? Is there any local wetland features that might impede the location? So we did actually have, outside of HRM, some of the locations we looked at, we ended up going to different sites because they were environmentally sensitive areas, so we did look at other areas. On the safety side, we are taking a lot of design aspects into the safety. Some of the concerns that you may hear about a battery facility, or if you start looking up about some of the issues that could come up with a site, would be the fire potential, similar to what you might be hearing about electric vehicles. So some people could have concerns about that. So a lot of the developments that have happened over the last few years, there's a lot of additional functionality and safety design characteristics that would not have been there even 4 or 5 years ago when we were installing a test battery at the Elmsdale substation, which has been operating very well since it's been in place. But there are new aspects with new designs, new facilities that would be applied to this site. One item would be spacing between the containers to make sure if there's an issue in one, that it would be isolated to that single container. So spacing is an item. All of the early detection, if there's any temperature deviation from each of the modules within the battery container, that's detected very early on. These are 24/7 monitored at our control center, as well through an O&M agreement with the designer of the facility. So we have a lot of safety and protection built into the design, and that'll continue through the operation and maintenance of the site. If you go to the next item, so I don't know if there's any highlights that you wanted to.
I'll just
talk about.
highlight the stakeholder engagement that we've been going through already. So as I mentioned, we met with a few council members, but we also are starting to engage the broader community about these as well. Recently, a postcard mail out was sent to residents living within 1 kilometer of the proposed site. This was initially to inform them of this proposed development, but also provide a point of contact to ask any questions or if they request any project updates. And then further along, we will be hosting an open house in the community as well. Right now, looking at an October 18th date for that, so we'll be promoting that throughout the community.
Okay, so having a look at the, to give a feel for what the site would look like, essentially, and this is from the majority of the manufacturers of battery facilities, they're essentially like a shipping container. The batteries are installed within racks, within the containers. There's multiple containers, and then you have some other equipment, some transformers and inverters. Those would be the other, you see the containers, which are very obvious, and then the smaller components across the facility, those would be the transformers and inverters. So it's fairly basic. You can see in the diagram the spacing that I was indicating, how they're spaced out. We also have it on a similar surface to the substation. It's a gravel surface. There's no combustible grass. If there was an issue where it could spread, it has a perimeter around the area where it really isolates the location. And it's fairly low profile as well. If you go to the next slide, you can see they're basically under 10 feet high. So if you're actually off the street a fair way, you will not even notice it from the distance. It doesn't have any features that are really extending beyond the 10 feet. The largest component will actually be the main transformer that ties into the existing transmission lines, and they're adjacent to existing switching or substations. So that would actually be the most visible. At this particular location, the driveway goes up the hill a fair piece, so it's not even visible from the road actually. So it's pretty small footprint and great energy concentration for such a small footprint, and pretty an unobtrusive type of development overall. So that, and if you go to the next slide, that just gives a different view to show that it's comparable to a substation, essentially. I think that's really the highlights of what we wanted to go through. If there's any questions?
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Do committee members have any questions? Councillor Morris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple small questions about, are there any noise components to the facility? And also, what are the sources of power? Like, can you tell us a little bit about how it fits on the grid and where the power is coming from and how it's being stored? Thank you.
Absolutely. So in terms of any sound that's emanating from the facility, so if you've walked by a substation, you might hear a bit of a hum like you would get around electrical equipment in general. So it will be emitting some sound. In our request for proposal, we're still working through our evaluation. We have not awarded it yet, but in our technical specification, we did include the required noise thresholds for the area. And it's definitely an item that we're paying close attention to when we receive the proposals. And also, we are doing some baseline sound testing and then post-sound testing. So we're actually documenting and measuring what the difference is, if it's appreciable.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I don't understand exactly how this battery storage is going to work. So if you could explain, is it storing renewable energy or is it just storing general energy, or how is that functioning?
Absolutely. Sorry, yeah, I know you had this. Sorry, I didn't get your second question.
No problem.
So basically, it would be whatever energy is on the grid at that
Okay.
moment in time. So For example, I think there's been some news items out there where there have been days, if it's a lower load and it's higher winds, that we have actually been 100% wind generation within the province. There have been times where we have experienced that. So that would be a great time when we're profiling the dispatch of the battery, when they would be used. That's when it would be most economical to charge as well. So all of that timing of when the battery would be charging and discharging would be managed through our Energy Control Center. And the best time would be to maximize the amount of renewable generation that's on the system when it is charging. So that would tend to be the overnight hours when the load isn't as high, and it'll help actually utilize more renewables on our system overall. So whatever the generation is in the province at that point in time, if it was happened to be at a time when there was less wind, then what's being stored on the battery, if you kind of look at it from what is going into them, it would be a lesser percentage would be from wind generation, but the best times to charge will be at those times when we do have higher wind. So it will be high percentage of wind generation.
Okay, so it'll help you make the most of those optimum times for generating, and it'll also help you even out the distribution, sounds like. Okay, all right, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is District 1 Councillor Kathy Daigle-Gammon. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. The first time was good. The second time was even better because then I had a little bit of background for it, which thank you very much. So there were 3 sites originally looked at. Will the other 2 sites still be considered? This will be the first one in the province, right? And so will you be looking at the other 2 sites as well?
Yes, so the other locations are on the South Shore in the town of Bridgewater, and then in the valley at a location called White Rock Road, not too far from Wolfville. So we are, even though they're 3 individual sites, it's basically we're viewing it as a single project. It's just
Okay.
spread out in different locations. You can have different functions in different areas depending on what the needs are at that time, local needs as well as across the grid needs, but this would be one of the 3 locations.
Great. And then just some follow-up questions. I'm a very visual person, so on that slide where looks like there is a person standing by the gate, so to me that would telegraph a little bit that somebody's going to be there all the time, but I'm sure where the comment is that monitoring 24/7 from the control center. So where is the control center located at, and would there be security on the site 24/7?
So there would not be a person physically at the site. Similar to substations, there wouldn't be a need to have them there at all times. We will have a regular maintenance program taking place where there will be frequent visits by employees and contractors to monitor how the site is, visual inspections. We will have cameras, so the camera will be operating 24/7 with that view at the supplier control center, because they're also monitoring the batteries, as well as back at our energy control center. That's located in Ragged Lake,
Right.
not too far from Bayers Lake area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. And just one more question, if I can, Mr. Chair. When we talk about the letter that went to residents just within 1 kilometer, so there's, that subdivision of Spider Lake, everybody's going to be driving up. 1 kilometer isn't going to take in the entire subdivision. I'm just wondering why choosing just the 1 kilometer, and is there any way to extend that? Because if you have that community meeting, when you have the community meeting, the entire community is going to be coming out. So in terms of expanding the notification would be appreciated, I would think.
And we did make sure that we did include all Spider Lake subdivisions, so it did go beyond that 1 kilometer radius
It
for
did?
that group, yes.
Okay.
So they should have received it. And for our the next piece of communication that we would kind of direct mail to residents, that radius will be expanded because it will be promoting our open house. So we really want the broader community to come out and speak with us.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation.
when we think about, we've got a very ambitious municipal climate change plan. The province has very ambitious climate change objectives too. This is all part and parcel of that, because we're not going to achieve any of those goals unless we have a green electric grid to get our energy from. Has there been, and I might be jumping down the road a little bit here, has there been any kind of thought, like, you've got 3. How many of these, like, I have no head for like 50 megawatts, well, like what that means in terms of our daily usage or anything like that. How many facilities like this do you think we would need in a world in which we're not using coal, where we're relying much more on renewables? Has the utility done any kind of thought around that, or am I maybe getting way ahead of myself?
No, that's a really great question, and we have our integrated resource plan, where a lot of different scenarios have been modeled with the transition from coal, especially to get to the 80% renewable by 2030. So they have a few scenarios, and within, they have a really great site on our website where they have any of the updates, and they have redone. So I think the initial IRP would have been out in 2020, and then they recently did an evergreen update of it, where they have a little bit more information over the next number of years to show, which should be phased in and some different scenarios, with Atlantic Loop in, Atlantic Loop out, and some other considerations. So with the batteries, and particularly with the 3 sites and that quantity, it was absolutely business case, makes sense, and with the plan to move forward with 3 sites, there's definitely opportunity for additional sites as the coal facilities start to get phased out and there's more renewables.
Okay, so these could be the first, we start with 3, but there could be many more of these to come depending on what happens with some of those bigger decisions around the electric grid then?
That would be one solution to have. I don't know if I would say many, but there could be some additional ones that would definitely help support that transition.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Stoddart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question of clarification. You were saying something about not being visible, was it? But I didn't catch all of that. Was it visible from the road or the? Sorry.
Yes, actually, I don't know if we can. In one of the slides, it kind of showed where the driveway was off Waverly Road, so you actually can't see the existing substation because it's quite a distance. I don't know the distance right off. It might even be more than 300 meters from the roadway to get up there. And there's a fair amount of sort of trees surrounding the area, so it's not actually visible from the road. And then with the containers for the batteries, they're not exceeding the height of the equipment that's in the substation area now, so you would not be able to see. It's not like there's a large tower or something going in like that possibly you could see outside of the area.
Yeah, I was just curious because one of the slides you showed had a sign and 2 gentlemen standing beside it, so that's not something that's actually going to be on the site.
Oh, no, that's just that actually isn't a rendering specific to that site. It's more of a general one, just to give an idea of the sizing for this. We're using this for any of the discussions about what a facility would look like. Once we do end up completing our evaluation, we will have some site-specific renderings completed, so you'll know exactly what it's going to look like with the features of that area. So that's more of a generic rendering, yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I just have a quick question about the cells, or the battery cells. Are they stackable?
You mean the actual containers?
Yes.
So there might have been some research done into stacking containers, but some of the fire protection characteristics are if there was an issue inside of the container, you really want to have a lot of ventilation. And when the batteries are running, they can generate some heat, and especially if it's in a warmer climate or during some of the warmer days in the summer, they do have heat and ventilation and air conditioning systems built within the container because you want to keep it at a constant temperature. So it would probably not be helpful to look at a stacked option because it could impede some of you really need a lot of high airflow. And actually, it might even be in one of the recent standards where they're deterring installations from considering that. I don't recall ever seeing one, but I know I've seen it written about that discouraging people to do that.
Okay, that's really good to hear. Can you go back to the slide where it shows the location within the broader community? I think Highway 107 was, yeah, there we go, sort of the bird's eye view. So that's clearly in a wilderness area to the north of it. So knowing the amount of heat that's generated from that area and the fire risk that's currently there and the explosive capacity, I'm just wondering what kind of a emergency management plan would you have? Since this is your first facility, I'm trying to understand, what work you've done with EMO, with the province, with the municipality to work through those risk assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are completing, so there's a standard that applies to any energy storage facility, NFPA 855. So in all of our evaluations through the RFP, we have a subject matter expert that we're working at that's completing a review of each proposal to make sure they're compliant with that standard. And as we move towards awarding it, so we're definitely making sure that the proponents we're dealing with meet all of that criteria. That subject matter expert actually wrote that section of our technical specification as well. We wanted to make sure that we were requesting all of the required standards and specifications that have been incorporated in over the last few years. And once it's awarded, we will be working with the local departments to have our energy response, site-specific energy response plan. Now, we have sent out some letters, and we are starting to have some meetings for a more general session like this, just to start to talk about what we asked for, what the plans would be in advance of knowing this is exactly what we're going with, because we don't have that contract awarded yet. But we are starting that engagement now.
Okay, excellent. And the NSPA 55, what year is that standard reference? When was that last updated?
So it's National Fire Protection Association, NFPA 855, and it's 2023. There's a new version.
Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go back to Councillor Morris the second time, I just have a couple of questions. Most of my questions were asked by my colleagues, and particularly the one that Councillor Lovelace was asking about emergency management plan, and I appreciate that answer. Was there specific conversation with our fire department here at HRM? We
did not meet with them yet. We did have an engagement to schedule, sorry, I'm looking over Susan. Susan did reach out to, there was a representative that was at another open house type of discussion. So we received the contact before the letters even initially went out, and that follow-up is in the works. I'll hand it over to Susan for that.
Oh, there we go. Yes, so we did send letters to all of the fire chiefs that these battery facilities are located in. And as Deborah shared, we're in the process of setting up an initial meeting with them. We've also had engagement with Halifax Hazmat Lead. So this would be who Deborah was talking about, got wind of, actually was just inquiring with Nova Scotia Power if we had any of these sites existing in HRM. So they've been shared info about the project. But that engagement and that stakeholdering is ongoing. And as we get more details when we wrap up the RFP process, we'll be sharing as much information as we can.
I'm glad to hear that. Obviously, they need to be well aware of what's there in the event that something does happen. And it sounds like you've done all that possibly can be done to make sure it's a safe site. So I know this area very well. It's not far from where I live. In fact, I mountain bike there almost every other day. Well, Halifax Water has kicked us out of there. That's another story for another time. But that's fantastic. My last question is, when does shovel go to ground, and how long does it take before it's up and operating?
Just before I answer that question, I just wanted to mention that also included in the RFP package was that we will be having training for each of the area responding fire departments. So that was actually included to include that in the scope of the proposal. So I also wanted to mention that. So in terms of the schedule, it's actually a fairly short construction phase. So there'll be some initial site preparation, and then the actual kind of final preparation with the foundations that the battery containers would sit on. So there's probably some initial civil works that would take place a few months in advance of the containers actually arriving. Then depending on the specific design that we go with, there'd be shipped in and placed directly on the foundation, so there wouldn't even be like a large staging area. They would basically be arriving and placed, and then a lot of electrical work to get them connected, and then we would enter into our testing that our Energy Control Center will be involved with as well. So that total time from really getting into the foundation to a point where we'd be testing is really only about 4 months, 4 to 5 months, so fairly short. We will be doing the initial site preparation well in advance to have everything ready to go. And then the large transformer that would connect it to the transmission lines, that's in the Nova Scotia Power scope of work. So we would like to put those in place to have that ready so we wouldn't be, to minimize number of people on the site at any one time, and then to kind of have our piece done and then get out of the way of whoever is the successful contractor that gets to build it. So it'll be from start to finish, it would be more in like a year timeline when you factor in civil, but intense activity would really be 4 months.
Well, thanks very much for that answer, and I'm glad to hear about the communication piece, not only with elected officials and emergency agencies, but with that community. So it is a great community, so there'll be lots of eyes on it for sure, as you could anticipate. For a second time around, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could help us get a sense of the scale or the impact of this change. And I'm not even sure how you would best measure it, but if this battery facility were operating and making its maximum contribution per day to the grid, what percentage would that be in Nova Scotia of the total power grid?
That's a really good question. So if you think about our peak load day that we experienced in February of this year, so that was 2,400 megawatts. That's instantaneous, not like the cumulative megawatt hours. So this, with the other two sites, that would be 150 megawatts, which at a peak time like that, where there's high demand, we would anticipate that every one of those sites, we'd be forecasting and have them charged and ready to provide energy during that period. So that would be that percentage. So it's not, it's obviously in and around 5%, like it's,
Okay.
that would be the initial site.
Okay, that's perfect. I was just trying to get a sense of the scale here. So what we're talking about is with all three operating, it'd be less than 5% contribution to the overall energy sources happening in the province.
That's at a peak time.
Right.
So typically the load would be in and around less than 2,000. So at times, it could be 10%. It just depends on what the load is at the time. But of available sources, if you go with that maximum every day of 2,400, it would be slightly less than 5%, yeah.
So the big advantage is it gives you a bit more flexibility with your power.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next, Kathy Dayer-Gammon. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question I forgot to ask, and I apologize. And it's around the location, adjacent, so Nova Scotia Power actually owns this property now, but adjacent, is it close to the Conrad Quarry lands? And is that any kind of a consideration that you need to look at if there is blasting or anything like that happening?
The quarry is on the other side. If we zoomed out a little bit more, you would see it on the other side of the community there. And after that was raised in our discussion a few months ago, we did ask about it because we do need to provide to our proponents through the RFP what the existing site conditions are. So we had that discussion, and they weren't concerned with the proponents that we followed up with, like, this is, note that this quarry is within the vicinity. Are there any concerns? And with the design specifications of the units, a lot of the larger installations are in and around the California area, and we actually had the opportunity to go visit a couple of them. So it would be the same specification of like areas that have much higher seismic activity, so they weren't concerned at all with being adjacent to a quarry.
Good. I anticipate that will be a question that will come in public engagement in October. Thank you.
Well, seeing no other questions on the floor, I thank you both for the presentation today. Thank you for coming to this committee to share that information. Please keep us in the loop on that, and do let me know personally also when the engagement session is going to go ahead. I know you alluded to the October 18th date, but and if you need suggestions of a meeting place too, I can help you with that too. So, all right. Thanks very much to both of you. All right, we're off for another presentation. Let's see, next presentation, 10.3.2, Ecology Action Center, United National Convention of Biological Diversity. And we have Karen McKendry from the Ecology Action Center here. Good to see you again, Karen, as always. Thank you and welcome. You, I think, know the drill. Do you have your deck up in front of you? All right, and so you have 10 minutes, and once again, after your presentation, the committee's available to ask questions. The floor is yours.
Thank you all for having me at Environment and Sustainability Standing Committee again. I'm happy to be back. This time I'll be talking about biodiversity. So just a reminder, I'm Karen. I work with Ecology Action Center on wilderness issues. So those are things like parks, protected areas, biodiversity, species at risk, and the health benefits of getting into nature. What I'm going to share with you today is a little bit about my experience in Montreal at a key international meeting and how it relates to how Halifax works on biodiversity. So I've cleverly named it Biodiversity in the City because it was in Montreal. So talking about biodiversity, that can be a daunting term. It really just means the variety of life on Earth. So we could find life on Mars, we could find some archaic bacteria, but it's all different kinds of life on Earth interacting that makes our planet really unique and makes all ecosystem services and goods possible. But a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I wanted to share this really striking piece of art from Métis artist Christy Belcourt. I also want to say that the world of biodiversity has often talked about the services that biodiversity provides in sort of a mechanistic way of thinking about nature, but the international community is embracing more indigenous ways of thinking about the variety of life on Earth and talking about the gifts of nature, the gifts of Mother Nature, and that provides for all of us. So amazingly, biodiversity supports us every day in what we breathe and what we eat and what our houses are made of. But there is a global biodiversity crisis, and people are sometimes talking about the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Fortunately, the world is working on the biodiversity loss crisis, and the main way that they work on it is through the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, so sometimes called the CBD for short. So all countries of the world belong to the Convention on Biological Diversity, and work has been going on for 25 years. But what's key is that every 10 years, the countries all come together and set goals for the next decade that every country commits by consensus to meet. And so that's what happened in Montreal in December, is this was one of those 10-year anniversaries where the goals were set for the year 2020 to the year 2030. The past goals were called the Aichi targets, and they were in Japan, and they were taken, worked on from 2010 to 2020. And in Montreal, the new targets were agreed to. And what they look like essentially in the end is the document. So this is the global biodiversity framework that we're all working under till the year 2030. It has purpose and principles, why work on biodiversity together, and it has 23 specific targets the world is going to try to meet by the year 2030. So the convention, the biodiversity framework, and cities, how do they work together? Well, this one, more than ever before, cited the need to work well with cities and what are called subnational governments, so like state governments or provincial governments. When analyzing what didn't go well about the past 10 years, we did not meet our global biodiversity targets to save ourselves and life on Earth. One of the gaps was that cities weren't more at the table during the discussions, even though they're on the front lines of experiencing biodiversity loss and providing solutions for it. So cities were very much front and center in Montreal and are featured more in the current biodiversity, or global biodiversity framework. Some of the ways they were there is there was 2 days of meetings just about cities and biodiversity, which I attended. The mayor of Montreal, Mayor Plante, Valérie Plante, very fittingly, was, very much a celebrity and featured at this event, not just because it was in her city, but because she's been a global emissary about cities working on biodiversity, and there's some amazing examples in Montreal. And so she launched what is called the Montreal Pledge. So like when you have a big international meeting and you want to get some attention and momentum around it, this was quietly launched before the meetings in December, and it's basically 15 actions that any city could sign on to work on biodiversity. And Councillor Lovelace has asked for a staff report to look into whether we'd like to sign on, and I've spoken with the staff person working on that report. So I hope you sign on. One of the main bodies that's been supporting cities working on biodiversity for decades is called ICLEI. It's a really long acronym, so you just have to remember ICLEI. So they have all sorts of programs to support cities in incorporating biodiversity and the needs of nature, which are ultimately our needs as well, into city planning. So just one of the programs that they run is called Cities with Nature, and I'll bring this up again a little bit later, so just remember that for now. In the 2 days in Montreal, I saw all sorts of examples of how cities are working with their biodiversity, working to improve it. So just a few of them that I might highlight for you, because I don't see them happening so much in HRM or Nova Scotia, is lots of cities around the world meet with subnational governments, so here like the provincial government or even the national government, about the global biodiversity framework. So there's a lot of discussion happening about how our international targets will be met, and those discussions are maybe not including you. So in other cities in the world, they are meeting about how they're helping to deliver on these global targets. Many cities have done a state of biodiversity report about the city that's then maybe turned into a strategy or an action plan. So other Canadian cities have biodiversity strategies and action plans they work on, sometimes for more than 10 years now. We do have this gap in HRM. And a lot of cities do land banking, and HRM actually used to do this, where the city acquires land either for conservation because it provides ecosystem services you need, like preservation of water, but also to have opportunities to shape development, so that sometimes cities are acquiring land they don't really need, but then they can make trades or do other arrangements when they want to move things around, like when an area that is vital for city services is potentially up for development, you have options around you. So HRM and the province and the federal government used to all talk about land in HRM and have sort of wish lists of land that they could swap with each other, and that isn't done anymore. So what could we be doing? Here are some ideas at the 3 scales. So one way to think about biodiversity, we often think about species diversity. I'm going to move forward in that in just a sec. We often think about species diversity. That's the easiest one for us to wrap our heads around. We also need diversity at the genetic level, diversity between individuals, and we also need diversity at the ecosystem level, lots of different ecosystems next to each other in our cities. So a little micro change that HRM could examine is with regards to the HRM design guidelines, or the Red Book. So this specifies, for example, the trees that can be planted on HRM land or by HRM contractors. In looking at those, some of those are not as supportive for biodiversity as they could be, and there's other total workable city trees that could support pollinators better or support bird life better. So I know Bird Friendly Halifax Coalition and maybe the Bee Friendly folks have ideas around specific plants that could be added to this list. So that's a sort of low-hanging fruit opportunity to be more helpful with biodiversity in the city. Medium level, absolutely keep up the municipal natural assets work. That's the work that staff has been doing a couple of years that can help you figure out the economic value of an area, how much it's helping with flood reduction or helping with urban heat effect. Other cities have then moved that into their decision-making framework. So this can help you when you're deciding about the placement of development or the shape of development, and being able to compare apples to apples. If this goes here, what does it mean for our future water needs, or what does this mean for our future, temperatures in this area? And if you join the Cities with Nature Network and compare to other Canadian cities that brought this into their decision-making framework, you can see a similar context to your own about how to bring it in when you're weighing these things. Bigger picture would be to look at doing a biodiversity strategy for HRM. HRM is doing a number of things that are helpful with biodiversity, but they're kind of disconnected. So you have the naturalization program that's been going for a couple years. That's fantastic. But then in a different corner, there's the integrated pest management plan, and then Halifax and Green Network Plan both mention biodiversity. So part of a strategy could even just be corralling the things you're doing already together to make them a little more coherent and identify any gaps that are losing the city money or our opportunities to engage people, and that together could form a basic strategy. A great place to call for a biodiversity strategy would be in the current regional plan. We have a number of our priority plans because during the last regional plan, councilors and staff called for those plans to be created, and now they're here and being implemented. You could call for a biodiversity strategy to be worked on over the coming years and implemented in steps in the future. So I hope these are just conversation starters. I'm always available to you and HRM staff anytime you want to further explore working on biodiversity. And I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. As always, appreciate the presentation. Do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Lovelace?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Karen. This is fantastic. It is, I'm pleased that you raised the Red Book. This is something we've been talking a lot about with regards to trees, what should be planted, where they should be planted, what needs to be removed, as far as invasive species is concerned in particular, but for the wildland-urban interface in particular with the risk of wildfire. And, talking about what should these future communities look like, and what can we do with our current communities, considering the high risk that we have. So I can appreciate, the look at the Red Book, and definitely that is something that we've been talking about internally. That economic value for natural assets is an ongoing conversation locally, but also nationally and globally. And so trying to understand who actually is doing this good work, what's working, what are the unintended consequences from it, what are the downfalls, how can we ensure that it's going to be integrated effectively, not only with our own community here, with our own municipality, but province-wide. Obviously, when you've got a bunch of accountants in a room, you want to make sure they're all speaking the same language so that we can do the best work that we possibly can for our residents. So that is certainly something, again, that's ongoing from an industry perspective as well as from a municipal perspective. But I do, I really like this idea of integrating biodiversity strategy into our regional plan. One of the things I think we struggle with is having kind of a pigeonhole look into what our municipality is. We tend to always focus on that urban core as being the city of Halifax, and we forget about what it means to support that wilderness area, the fishing villages, the communities that have been here since the early 1800s or before that. And they don't have an urban interface. They just, they are just fishing villages, for example, or farming communities. And so I wonder, with that diversity strategy and looking at it from a regional perspective, perhaps Montreal is, a good sort of template. But I'm just wondering if you have come across templates for that, considering the size of our municipality, and how, if there are other examples that you would suggest we look at.
Yeah, the great thing about joining the Cities with Nature Network or just reaching out to other Canadian cities is you could find a comparable city that has urban aspects and rural aspects. So I think you could find a comparable one and find, what worked in a more urban setting and what worked in a more rural setting. But I would say working on biodiversity, you could have principles that you could apply in any setting. So looking at your integrated pest management plan, one of the biggest threats to biodiversity in the world is invasive species.
Right.
You could work on invasive species in an urban setting. It might look a little bit different in a rural setting, but it doesn't mean you couldn't apply the principle there. So you could have that final lens of what does this look like to apply in communities, but still have a higher level strategy that works on the accepted principles of how to work on biodiversity.
And certainly, I would suggest then that we would need to have some kind of a partnership or working group with the province, considering their role in an invasive species, for example. So, this is definitely a conversation we need to have with our provincial counterparts. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Karen, for being here today and presenting these ideas for how we could move forward. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what the barriers might be to for Halifax to have more diversity in our trees. We have a fantastic urban forestry program, but are there any barriers to having more native species and variety in terms of our tree species? And could you give us some examples maybe from Montreal of what they've been successful at doing in terms of introducing biodiversity into the city, what it might look like for people and the benefits for people?
So with regards to some barriers I've noticed in HRM with regards to trees, I mean, Crispin Wood, who works on the Urban Forestry Master Plan, could very much tell you, and other people in HRM could tell you, some of the barriers around trees are if you wanted to plant more native trees and shrubs, getting native seed stock, those species that you want to do locally as opposed to some sort of English oak. Getting native species can be really tricky in Nova Scotia. Not all of the nurseries here grow them. They might not grow them in the amount that HRM needs, so HRM is relying heavily on Ontario for some of its tree stock. So just getting the species you want could be challenging, but I can suggest some creative solutions around that. Also, in learning about street trees, they have to be friggin' tough. That's partly why we plant so many ginkgo trees, because they can withstand the whippersnippers that the contractors bring in more than any other tree. I'm not saying revamp all the trees, I'm saying broaden your portfolio. So there can be trees and shrubs that are hardy enough to be on the street. They're not providing like sightline problems. I recognize some of the like logistical challenges with plantings, but are providing more flowers and berries and habitat for birds. So you can get more bang for your buck if you took a biodiversity lens. I'm not saying it's gonna solve anything or it's gonna boot out some of the other species. With regards to some projects in Canada, including in Montreal, I had such a great time in Montreal and learned so much in December. I went back there last month with my family to look at some things. I would say benefits of having a biodiversity lens on other pieces of work that HRM are doing is it just makes them that much better. So we all know that Montreal has really upped its game as far as bike infrastructure. And so where possible, where they've changed corners, as well as infrastructure for pedestrians, they've added little green plantings all over the place, including ones that are just wild, so they're not expecting maintenance over time. So by having the lens of could this also be a project that greens just a little, the whole city is so much greener than, the last time I was there before December was like 20 years ago. They also partnered on personal initiatives. So in Montreal, with many of the walk-up housing that's like 2 or 3 stories, there are these back alleys. So some of them are called ruelle verte, which means like green back alley. So the city initially helped with some plantings to green those up and then walked away, and then community does what they like. So they put in like funky furniture or cool art or whatever. And yes, it's weeds and some wilder plants and not originally just what was planted, but it requires very little maintenance and provides quality of life for people because kids are playing back there or people are growing grapes back there. So it has, I think when you take a biodiversity lens, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot more or a lot different, but you do get these other benefits. They've also done more with rooftop gardening in Montreal than we've done here. And in many cases, that's quite purposely providing some food, either food for people who need it, like food banks, or the conference center where the meeting was held in December, some of the food for that was grown on the roof of the conference center. So there was a feedback loop of providing a business need or a community need and not just plants on the roof for other purposes. So I think taking the lens could be adding to other projects that are already going to happen in HRM.
I think I have a bit more time left. Just if I could follow up, do you see a potential for projects through HRM Parks and Recreation putting a biodiversity lens? I guess what I'm thinking about is I had the opportunity to travel a bit too this summer, and I noticed in some other cities the plantings are wilder. So they're planting grasses that are they're allowed just to grow to their full height, and they're allowing lawns to be mowed less frequently and things like that. So I'm just wondering if you've seen some of the benefits of that type of approach that we could apply through Parks and Rec.
We already have that great naturalization program, which is not only going to, teach on a small scale what is it like for HRM when we naturalize a little bit more of our parks, or when a private citizen does it. It's like teaching you the biology of how does it go after 3 or 5 years, but it's also that moving that sort of cultural yardstick on people getting a little more used to other things other than just pavement and like Kentucky bluegrass being shaved down. So there would be like a piece of cultural work probably to do if we were to naturalize the city a lot more, but there's also so many benefits. People can't help but fall in love with it. I mean, parts of our parks, if you let them go a little bit more wild, they're going to grow up as raspberries and blackberries. I mean, who doesn't want to pick berries in the summer? So I think if you showcase the benefits, it can help maybe start to counteract the culture of like maintained grass is the only thing. I'm sure you guys hear about that a lot as counselors. But that's where the education and maybe even incentive piece, right? Like when you want to move the public along, you can use education, you can also use incentives. So maybe people, I know HRM already does a free tree giveaway, but maybe you're also giving away other plants to help people naturalize their property. So it's incentivizing as partnering with education.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks again.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I just have a couple. And grass cutting and HRM land, we never have that conversation here in this council. Now, I think Councillor Lovelace alluded to it, and you mentioned some folks too. Who in fact have you spoken to other than the municipality? Has there been conversations with the province and the Department of Environment? Have you had any conversation with NSFM? You alluded to Crispin Wood. I mean, have you had those conversations with him also? I'm just trying to get a sense who are the other folks you've been dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for HRM, so I would love to facilitate conversations for HRM if there's a signal that HRM wants to go in that direction somehow. But some people you could be having conversations with are, remember how I said all the countries of the world agree by consensus to try to meet those goals? So Canada signed on to that and was quite prominent at the meetings. Each country then has to make an action plan and a resourcing plan for how they're going to change the fishery industry and the forest industry and help cities naturalize and stuff. Those conversations about the National Action Plan are happening now, so HRM could be party to those conversations or not. And then there'll be trickle-down money that's probably going to trickle down to the provinces and territories. You could be discussing with the province, can some of that money come to us for our biodiversity initiatives? So that's one of the conversations that can be happening. The province has a Biodiversity Act. Not a lot of people know about this. I worked on it for a couple of years. It went very politically sideways at the end, but Nova Scotia does have an act to protect biodiversity, and it has details in it, so HRM could meet at any time about how does that act apply in HRM, or how could we foster some of what that act is meant to do. The education system is slowly trying to move to students engaging with biodiversity more. HRM owns school grounds, so there could be some common ground there. How are we naturalizing our playgrounds to support some of the initiatives around learning more about environmental stewardship in grade 12 courses, or the initiative to have kids learning in the outdoors more? So there's some opportunities that I would absolutely help facilitate if you're interested.
Great, thank you very much for that. Seeing no other questions, really appreciate the presentation. I get a sense that there may be some follow-up from today's presentation, so thank you. Okay, folks, we're now moving up to public participation, and this is kind of new in the agenda. We usually have our public participation at the end of our meetings, and we just made this motion at last council meeting, so now we're moving it up. So the opportunity for people from the public to come forward and speak on any topic they wish. You have 5 minutes, and we ask you that you please keep your comments respectful and on topic and direct them to the chair. The clerk was just leaving now, but she has this great sign. We're very high tech here at HRM, so the first thing that she'll show you is a yellow sign that says you have 30 seconds left, and then after the 30 seconds has gone by, she will show a red sign like this one here, and then that you're meaning your time is up. And don't let you think, don't judge the book by its cover. She's very mean and aggressive, so watch out. So we do have some people who've signed up on the list. The first person on the list is David Hobbolt. David, are you here? Yep, come on down, David. I'm sorry? Okay, and true Canadian style, letting someone else go ahead of you. You first, no you, I insist. That's quite all right. Alan, come forward. Please introduce yourself, and if you can sit wherever you would like. Introduce yourself and what community did you come from, and you have 5 minutes. And the way that this works, just to be clear, you may have a question that you pose to the committee. It's not a back and forth response. It's up to a committee member if you ask a question, whether they want to bring that question forward. But the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Here we are. Okay, my name's Alan Joyce. I've been involved with this situation in Fall River since 2018. It's interesting that we talk about biodiversity because we're here trying to protect biodiversity in Lake Thomas and in the entire Shubenacadie waterway. So I live in Windsor Junction. I'm about 2 kilometers from the Carr Farm property, about 3 kilometers from Lake Thomas, and I'm here to talk about the no net phosphorus rule. So just to go back, in 2009, there was about 20 volunteers that worked with Councillor Krista Snow and then Councillor Barry Dalrymple and the planner Maureen Brown, I believe her name was, to come up with the plans for District 14 and 17 area, and they included future land use plans, including the property known as Carr Farm. And part of the documents included a land use bylaw, and specifically 14G81C, which is the no phosphorus rule. So I'm just going to read it to you. Well, maybe I won't. 3 minutes and 42. The phosphorus rules are all in the documents. There has been a lot of discussion about the province should be doing this and HRM should be doing that, and I feel there's been a lot of finger pointing back and forth about the situation in Fall River. So I would like to make the argument that it doesn't matter what the province has done, HRM still has a responsibility for their bylaw. So if I was an earth hauler and expected to move fill in and out of a construction site, I would have in my wallet a provincial driver's license. I would be driving a provincial license plate truck. If I drove that truck over the speed limit in a 100 series highway, I'd be stopped by an RCMP officer. It's paid for by the provincial government. If I did it within the city, I'd be stopped by a provincial officer. Both of them would be issuing me a summary speed ticket that's under provincial rules. If I took that same truck and I started making deliveries on a construction site at 3 a.m., I would be breaking what? An HRM bylaw. So that's the N200 noise bylaw, and I would be issued a fine of 467 first offense, 927 second offense, 1,272 for the third offense. Now, we have a bylaw that is this no phosphorus rule, and as it stands, it's simply a go, no-go decision point. So when you come to the point of issuing a building permit, that is totally the responsibility of HRM. So just like the noise bylaw is written within HRM's jurisdiction, does not matter if the province has approved a wastewater plan that meets their guidelines or not. Just like it does not matter to the province has a licensed truck driver and their truck and then drives and makes noise, it's breaking an HRM bylaw. So what I would like to see is, number one, with any changes, so I noticed the bylaws, a 20-page document, and it details out if there's changes or exceptions, and there's a lot of details to it. It comes back to council for council's approval. As far as I can see, the no net phosphorus rule has been changed or interpreted without HRM council or even community council's approval. It was done in the planning department, which I believe is totally wrong. And the other issue is this go, no go. I mean, once that decision is made, there's no way to police, or, for better word, there's no way to monitor whether a system is adding phosphorus to our lakes. So even though the sewage treatment plant or wastewater plant at this stage will be adding 6.4 kgs up to 81 kg a year in phosphorus, we have no way to measure that after the fact. There's simply a go, no-go decision, and and then they proceed. So if there is a change to the bylaw, I would like to see a way that there is a way to measure the phosphorus levels on an ongoing basis, as well as, that's one of the main things I would like to see. But the other is just to abide by your own bylaw. And Dave will be talking next about where we think that didn't happen. And there we are, time's up. Thank you, really appreciate this.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce, appreciate it. David, come on down, you're next on The Price is Right. Dave, once again, just introduce yourself and the community you're from, and you have 5 minutes, and the floor is yours, sir.
Sure, which button? Is that on now? There we go. Yeah, I'm Dave Hobbolt. Live in Fall River. Started an appeal against the last and final appeal against the Carr Farm facility development. So when we were told about the development, first it started out as, I think, 120 apartments and 65 townhouses. Wasn't good enough. Developer came back, went to 300, no townhouses. Then it went to 400, seniors complex, that's what we were told. 65 and over is what we were told. That was what I signed. I actually supported that development. All along, nobody mentioned, whenever they were asked, what they were doing with the septic. We come to find out when it comes down to the final appeal of 100 people, some of the councillors in here that were involved in that appeal weren't allowed to even discuss or take into consideration this sewage treatment plant. All the residents, even the seniors that signed on to this and were here supporting it in chambers, nobody knew that there was going to be a pipe in our lake. It wasn't disclosed to us until it got down to the final appeal. And the only way we found out was by accident, because I work with developers. I sell cranes and boom trucks. I build houses. I'm certainly not against development. But when I found out about this pipe going to the lake, I thought it was just very underhanded. They had a design of a sewage treatment plant, and I got a drawing by accident from another guy who showed the pipe going down our street and into our lake. And I said, that can't be. Sure enough, once I followed it up, I guess a couple things is that there has to be more accountability and more openness on these sewage treatment plants going into our lakes. I think if residents had known that there was going to be a pipe in our lake from the start, this project, we wouldn't even be here. There's no way. I've talked to more people. I've even, on the last appeal, went around and knocked on doors to find out and say, are you appealing this? Did you know about this? Yeah, but I don't know anything about an appeal. I said, fine, let me do it for you. Sign here. So I did the appeal. I cannot believe that a couple things is that we had to go through a Freedom of Information, a FOIPOP, to find out that a private company was going to build their own sewage treatment plant and run it into our private lake. So our kids get to swim in that septic, our animals get to drink it, we even have homes on the lake that are drinking it. On top of that, and I found out more information about sewage treatment plants than I ever wanted to know in my life. But I now know that there's at least 3 current systems running into Lake Thomas. This will be a 4th, which will be much larger. I mean, you're talking 1,200 people here that are going to feed, treated septic into our lake, on top of the other 3 that are already there. Plus, when it all runs into Lake Fletcher, that's where we see another one down in Lake Fletcher. That all runs into Grand Lake, where we killed a couple of dogs with blue-green algae a couple of years ago and put somebody in the hospital. That's not going to get any better. Phosphorus is going to be an issue. If we keep putting septic in these lakes and riverbeds, we don't have a hope in hell of ever saving our lakes. And I think when you look at from an environmental standpoint, certainly climate change, we're not going to get any cooler. Heat, phosphorus, and nitrogen are going to create blue-green algae. We're going to render our lakes to the point where you're not going to be able to do anything but look at them. I mean, as it is now, look how many times they were closed this year to paddlers. We have a canoe club that runs right past where this outfall is going to be. Kids tip their boats over. That's what they get to swim in. I think it's just, that part of it is just ridiculous. But the point is that if the developer had told us up front how he was going to treat his septic, then we would have all had a chance to say, great idea. That trumps, the need for our seniors housing, the need for our long-term care facilities. That all comes first against this. Or we say, no, we're going to save our lakes, put all that somewhere else. And if everybody had known that from the get-go, like I said, we wouldn't even be sitting here. I've talked to, must be 2,000 people over the last year and a half about about the line going to the lake. I get stopped at the grocery store and the liquor store. I get stopped going to work. You know, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is where we're at. And I think going forward, if you're going to put any sewage treatment plants, allow them to dump the effluent into our lakes. You know, this has to be known. This is 81 kilograms a year, up to 81 kilograms a year. You have a zero phosphorus rule, which I'm sure is supposed to help protect our lakes and stop phosphorus from going in them. So you're going to stop that much, and we're going to put 81 kilograms in it. Why do you have the rule? If you broke your own rule, and we can say right here that staff at HRM discussed the fact that, hey, this plant doesn't meet, no, I guess I'm out of time.
You shouldn't mean to stop you at half sentence, but thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate your comments. So, we do have a question of clarification, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in, Dave. And I was pleased to stand with you in the appeal as well. So just to that last point, though, for clarity, when we say that HRM did not, in your opinion, follow the no net phosphorus rule, you were about to hold up a piece of paper. Can you just tell me what would have been on that supports your comment?
John Lamb.
Okay.
Push your button, there you go, okay.
In a nutshell, he basically said that the design, the net policy, had a high-level meeting with HRM, which applies to wastewater effluent. We understand that wastewater effluent was currently included in the zero net phosphorus, but they may consider amending the policy at some point to take it out or modify it due to the difficulty achieving the zero increase in P loading for wastewater effluent. It appears there are only 8 to 10 projects that may fall under this zero net policy. If it's one project, it's too much. But that's basically what happened was the zero net phosphorus rule included the wastewater treatment plants. And for some reason, it was taken out for this project. If you have a zero net phosphorus, it's zero net phosphorus. There's no in between. But according to this, HRM has decided, and we agree that the plant meets the guidelines of the province, but it does not meet HRM's guidelines. You know, you tell me why it was taken out. We've been trying to find out.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. That's the end of my list for people signing up. Would anybody else like to come forward and speak? Yep, ma'am, come on forward. Yep. Welcome. You can have a seat and state your name and the community you're from, and then just push the red button and you have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Elaine Blanchard. I've taken my eagle feather with me for confidence and strength and courage because I'm extremely nervous doing this. I am one of the 11 families on Lake Thomas, on Thomas Drive, where we get our drinking water, our washing water, our every water from this beautiful lake. I've lived on this street since the year 2000. And a few years ago, I was hearing about this project that was going up with affordable seniors housing, and I'm thinking, great, I might need to go there someday. So instead of moving to the city. But the one thing that struck me odd was, how can you put affordable and Fall River in the same sentence? But let's move on from that. So I thought, stay positive, stay positive. So as I knew it back then, and I didn't realize it went back to 2009. I don't know where I was, perhaps busy working 10 hours a day and raising a child on my own. But as I knew it about a few years ago about this project, it said, okay, accommodation of 2 to 250 seniors is what I heard. And, okay, sorry, I'm going on. So I was trying to be positive again, and I knew back then that I never knew back then there was a possibility of this effluent pipe going in there. And perhaps when that was coming up, maybe I should have, hindsight, asked that question, is there going to be a sewer system in there? Because we, on our street, have our own high-tech $150,000 system that we all, 11 of us, shared in the cost. And be darned if we could put our effluent pipe in the lake. No, we are environmentalists, we are water protectors. So now, from what I understand, the 250 people has gone up to maybe 800 or more. And there's going to be many senior citizens on various and sundry medications. And one is perhaps being chemotherapy. Isn't that not a nuclear drug? And how can you tell me that there's only going to be a trace of these pharmaceuticals going into the lake? It's not going to be harmful to you, Elaine. Look, I've got issues going on in my body now, and I don't need any extra nuclear waste, phosphorus, or any other pharmaceuticals messing with what I'm dealing with now. And the other thing is when this all came up, no one knocked from Carr Farm Project knocked on our door and said, as a good neighbor would do, guys, we're building a new project over here, and this is what's going to go on. How, you have any concerns right now? This is what. Nobody knocked. And then I found out later on that the claim to fame was that they didn't know 11 of us got our drinking water from the lake. And I'm going, how is that all possible? Did you not do your due diligence here? Did you go and make sure that there were no people around the lake getting the drinking water from? No, they didn't do that. And even after they found out about it, still they didn't knock on our door. Still they didn't say, and my question is like, one of these days when the system goes in, it's going to break down. It's made by people. And we all know systems break down after a while. So what if that system is broken for a couple of days and because we'd asked that question, what happens if the system breaks? What are you going to do for us over here? They said, we'll issue a boil order. And this is coming from environmental people. And my first thought was, how disrespectful. We've been getting, our residents been getting their water since the early 60s. And Norma Rodenizer, my neighbor, she tells me she can't even recall not once having to boil her water. So I thought that was disrespectful, because at that time, when the system breaks down, and I'm sure it will, that's going to cost us money. Would we got to go buy my jugs of water from Sobeys to drink? Where am I going to go for a shower? Where am I going to go and do my laundry? Expenses. So that's the disrespect I'm thinking. I know that was not given us by the environmentalists, by especially the Carr Farm Project development. 30 seconds. So I'm asking today, help me save Lake Thomas. It's beautiful. Chima and all the rowers, the Olympians that row there get medals for Canada. Help me save this. And hold on. I think I'm just about done. So I do thank you, and I just one more thing. I just want to say that the only substances that should go into any body of water is what our good Creator gives us from our skies. By the way, there's an online petition. There's over 500 names there, and I'll knock on doors. Thank you, Willallen.
Well, Alan, thank you very much. And we couldn't tell you were nervous. You did an excellent job. Well done. Well done.
It's this. It's this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Call for any other speakers. Anyone would like to speak? Anybody like to come forward and speak? Call third last time. Would anybody like to come forward and speak? So there's no further speakers for the public participation. Now we're looking at item 12, information items brought forward. There are none, and we're now at staff reports. 3.1.1, current policies for River Lake Secondary Plan update. And we, I believe, have a staff presentation, and I see Aaron McIntyre here and Emma Waddy. Both of you welcome to come forward. Aaron, do you have your slide deck in front of you? No. Just getting that now. Katie, you're helping her with that slide deck? Yep. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. My name is Erin McIntyre. I'm the Director of Development Services with HRM's Planning and Development. I'm here to give you an overview of the application of the Fall River Lake Secondary Plan Area policies in regards to limitations on phosphorus within the lake system. This was the request of the committee. I'm going to review the development of the policies as they currently exist today, how they're applied, and what they've revealed in practice, and talk about a bit about the plan going forward. This is an outline of the background studies that were completed that informed the plan policies. There were 3 watershed studies that were completed. Firstly, in 1993, Vaughan Engineering Associates Limited prepared a study for the former County of Halifax Shubenacadie Planning Pollution Control Task Force. The study concluded that the Shubenacadie headwater lakes were under significant stress from malfunctioning treatment plants and inadequately installed on-site systems, as well as pollution from stormwater runoff, mine tailings, and pyritic slate. In 2009, HRM commissioned Jake Whitford to prepare the Fall River Shubenacadie Lakes watershed study. The study formed the background support of the River Lakes secondary plan development. The Fall River Shubenacadie Lakes watershed study predicted that Lake William and Thomas would become mid-range mesotrophic, Lake Fletcher would become upper range mesotrophic, and Grand Lake will become upper range oligotrophic as a result of existing and proposed development within 1,000 feet of the lakes. In 2013, AECOM prepared a background study of the Shubenacadie Lakes subwatershed for the Port Wallace Plan. That study revealed that most lakes were mesotrophic and that Grand Lake was oligotrophic due to malfunctioning treatment plants and failing on-site systems. Lake Charles, Lake Thomas, and Lake Fletcher would remain mesotrophic at full build-out, and that Grand Lake could become lower range mesotrophic at full build-out or remain oligotrophic with low impact development approaches applied. While not specifically targeting the Shubenacadie Lakes watershed, the 2014 Regional Plan establishes water quality objectives for the municipality. They're listed here to achieve public health standards for body contact recreation and to maintain the existing trophic status of our lakes and waterways to the extent possible. These policies are meant to provide regional level direction, and our secondary plans over time are intended to align with regional plan strategies. As directed by the regional plan, all secondary plans must strive to maintain the present trophic status of the lakes. One of the strategies for achieving this goal under the River Lakes secondary plan is to control emissions of phosphorus from large-scale developments proposed by development agreement or site plan approval. Policy RL23 of the secondary plan requires the applicant to submit a phosphorus net loading assessment prepared by a qualified consultant to determine if the proposed development is capable of achieving a no net increase in phosphorus loading in a post-development condition as compared to the phosphorus that is estimated to be emitted from the site before the development takes place. If the study predicts that the proposed development is expected to exceed current levels, then the developer will have to propose measures to reduce the phosphorus before the development can take place. In 2014, a phosphorus net loading protocol was developed by AECOM consultants to guide the development of our phosphorus net loading assessment studies. A phosphorus net loading assessment can use estimates of phosphorus emissions for various types of land uses from published studies and should include consideration of the matters that are listed on the slide: proposed buildings, roads, vegetation, slopes, soil cover, depth to bedrock, rainfall, surface drainage, buffers, setbacks of septic systems from lakes and wetlands, and any other sensitive natural feature. The plan policy outlines that reductions in density or other best management practices may be used in order to mitigate phosphorus emissions. Stormwater management and erosion and sedimentation control, increased riparian buffers, and reductions in impervious surfaces and retention of non-disturbance areas are all examples of the elements that we most often see intended to mitigate emissions from a development site. The River Lakes Secondary Plan identifies 4 opportunity sites intended to address the need for alternative housing forms other than single and 2-unit dwellings to meet the needs of seniors, young adults, and other sectors of the population within Fall River. Sites A, C, and D are directed by plan policy to proceed through the development agreement process. Mapped on screen is Site B, otherwise also known as the Carr Farm site, which is located on the south side and roughly midpoint along Fall River Road. The plan policy differs somewhat for Site B. In order to carry out the policy direction relative to Site B, a site-specific zone was created, which enables the consideration of multiple unit dwellings and nursing homes, now shared housing with special care. The process for consideration is first through site plan approval, which requires that the development officer review and decide on matters such as building location, parking and loading facility locations, driveway access, landscaping, non-disturbance areas, lighting, and more as set out within the zone. The zone also requires the development officer's review and approval of a traffic study and a phosphorus net loading assessment. Both studies must be submitted and accepted by the development officer before a development permit can be issued. For Site B, the development officer received and approved a site plan approval application in fall of 2021. The proposal included 4 buildings comprising of 500 units for seniors housing and 1 building containing 140 nursing home beds. The development officer's decision to approve the site plan approval was appealed by property owners within 100 meters of the property. Northwest Community Council held a hearing and upheld the development officer's decision, and that approval remains in place. The proposal includes an on-site sewage treatment plant and associated discharge of treated effluent into Lake Thomas, which has received provincial approval. The applicant provided both studies within the site plan approval application, which were reviewed on a preliminary basis, and their findings have been accepted. Relative to both studies, the development officer reviews for completeness and satisfaction of land use bylaw requirements, and specific to the phosphorus net loading assessment, the development officer relies on the certification of the authoring professional that the mitigative measures proposed will reduce phosphorus export levels to that of or below pre-development state. Consideration of wastewater treatment facilities is not listed as a requirement under the phosphorus net loading assessment protocols. And since the proposed wastewater treatment facility provided treatment for phosphorus, it was not considered relevant under the study. Further, the provincial approval is based on a receiving water study that has established that the effluent discharge will not negatively impact the lake water quality or impact its trophic state. Central to this conversation is the question of whether or not this approach is working. At the time of their adoption, the phosphorus net loading policies were meant to be a starting point in order to address issues that were made apparent through the background studies within the context of the health of the lake system. Where we're not in a position to apply perfection in policy, we do our best to address the issues that are presented. Plan policy is intended to be routinely reviewed so that it can evolve along with communities' needs and desires, and as our understanding of environmental science grows. It's well accepted that in order to truly address lake health, a variety of mechanisms to control both point source pollution and more widespread phosphorus generation is needed within the whole of the watershed. To put it bluntly, the current approach is much better than what we'd had prior to the secondary plan's adoption, which was little lake protection at all. In terms of current and future state, we've come a long way. We've currently apply riparian buffer protection, require areas of non-disturbance, have adopted and are applying the principles of the Halifax Green Network Plan, and require best practice relative to erosion and sedimentation control, stormwater management, and wetland protection. There are all kinds of considerations that may be included in future, some that require policy support and others that we can stand up without. Riparian buffer increase is being reviewed through the regional plan. Septic tank maintenance and fertilizer use awareness campaigns and programs would be helpful in addressing the more broad phosphorus generation issues. And we expect to hear about community concerns relative to watershed health through public engagement, which will help inform a more holistic policy review on phosphorus loading mitigation through regional plan review. So in terms of what we're doing right now, there are 3 specific initiatives that I'd highlight that are either underway or planned. HRM's Environment and Climate Change Group are part of a watershed working group which brings together municipal and provincial departments to examine our business practices. There's a depth of knowledge and understanding around that table in terms of the challenges we face within watershed management. In June of this year, Regional Council was presented with the draft regional plan, which is now open for feedback from the public. Information can be found on Shape Your City along with opportunities to engage. The plan highlights the work underway on watershed management, integration of policy with Halifax and the Green Network Plan, and the previously mentioned watercourse wetland buffers and coastal protection. Formerly the bylaw simplification plan and now the rural plan review within community planning Within the presentation to council earlier this year, we've set out the plan to revisit policy and regulation within the rural areas of the municipality, and there will be engagement with community in 2024 and 2025 with a framework delivery to council planned for 2026. So I'll stop there. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions of clarification.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I appreciate it so much. First up is Councillor Kathy Dago-Gammon.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Aaron. There's, gosh, there's so much in this, and thank you for it. In some ways, wow, I wish I had this 2 years ago, some of it, but so just for clarification, because Site B was a site plan approval, that's why not going through a development agreement, that was some of the changes, or that's why the different approach was used, because it was a site plan approval?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So when we talk about the development officer accepted the studies that were done, and one of those studies was the phosphorus net loading assessment, right? So they accepted it, and what qualifications are required for the person who gives us that study? Like, what are those qualifications, and do they look at the bylaw, all of those kinds of things? And because there has been questions about accepting a study and under what qualifications that study was accepted under.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the author of the report specific to Carr Farm Site B was prepared by a certified hydrologist, I believe, a member in good standing with their association, a certified qualified professional. And the report was reviewed internally really for completeness and accuracy relative to those protocols that had been established. Again, just a guide. Not iterated necessarily within the regulations of the bylaw or expressed in policy, and also reviewed for alignment with intent. And I think this is a really important part in this conversation, that the test relative to municipal plan policy is really about the reasonability of achieving the intent of the plan policies. So we look at the plan to make sure it's prepared by the right person, that it is complete and accurate. We rely on the certification of that person, who is the scientist who knows the science and can apply the appropriate measures. But we're also keeping an eye on the long-term goals, both of the regional plan and of the local plan, that talk about maintaining the trophic status of the lakes and making sure that development doesn't negatively impact them, and the factors that were informing those background studies as the policies were developed. And so it's really an outcome-based approach when we're looking at plan policy. Not to be too long-winded, and it was a short question, I'm giving you a long answer, but the other piece of that is the acceptance by the development officer of the study relative to the land use bylaw. So now we're switching from policy alignment with intent of policy to accuracy and correctness relative to what is set out in the land use bylaw. Council delegates their authority on approval on decisions of the land use bylaw to the development officer, and it's meant to be a fairly objective binary approach. Does this meet the minimum standards set out in the bylaw? The bylaw says we need a study that establishes the methods to mitigate and establishes that there's no net increase in phosphorus, which we received. The development officer is really at that point without a whole lot of subjectiveness surrounding their decision.
Thank you. I've just a minute left. So the other question I would have then would be, how do we measure does that study take into consideration? It said something about that the sewage treatment plant treats the phosphorus. And so that's another consideration on that. So how do we measure the pre and post phosphorus? Like, even as I read the bylaw, I'm still, maybe it's just as a layman, but how do we measure pre and post phosphorus? And then even within this, when a developer, for no matter this development, this project or another one in the future, how do we, is it at the permitting stage that we figure out the mitigation plans for phosphorus pre and post?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
I hope I said that right, but.
Yeah, that's okay. So on the first part, how do we measure? Despite using words like oligotrophic and mesotrophic, which I have practiced, I am absolutely not a scientist in the field whatsoever. So again, we rely on the certifying professional member in a good standing with their association to apply the appropriate measures in terms of first establishing establishing and estimating post, and then developing the mitigative measures in order to balance. Because we don't have the expertise within planning and development to do to complete such an exercise.
So that comes at the permitting stage?
So for Site B, this is that difference in approach relative to site plan approval. For Site B, because we weren't going through a development agreement process, it was pushed to the permitting process. For the 3 other opportunity sites in Fall River, the policy directs us to development agreement. And when we're looking to satisfy policies relative to a discretionary decision of council over a development agreement, we're wanting to make sure that those Ts are crossed and Is are dotted at that point so it was pushed out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we really need to improve our protection for lakes through the regional plan. And based on my experience with Carney Lake and all the issues there, it's quite daunting given the structure that we have to work with to actually make real improvements in the water quality and make them lasting. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what we need to do to improve watershed protection at HRM and what legal changes we need to do that, because what I keep running into is we just don't seem to have the powers at the municipal level to enact watershed protection in the city. And unless we do things at a watershed level, we can't address the issues one by one in each lake. The real way to do it is through watershed protection, and we don't seem to have the legal powers. So I'm just wondering if you could comment a little bit on the best possible thing we could do in our regional plan, and whether it is in fact true that we need provincial changes in order to make the watershed plans work. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm probably not in a position to give you a specific answer. It's probably the most poignant question relative to a lot of the environmental policies that we will be reviewing through regional plan. I think the important thing, the important point that has been made clear to me through the course of my learning in all of this is that it might be that we need more legislative powers. I think what we need is, and are achieving now, is more cooperation and alignment between both the province and the municipality. I think we have a common goal, and I think we have a common trapping of each of us going off to try and find solutions on our own. That watershed working group that Energy and Environment are working on includes provincial counterparts, and defining goals and common solutions for them, I think, is one of the good news stories that has been revealed to me. I think the work that's been done on Halifax, I mean, we're sort of in our infancy in terms of turning our thoughts and our attention towards environmental protection. So I expect that, as with a lot of things that are going on that council sees, we are at a moment where things are really starting to evolve in a good direction. Not fast enough. That's a vague answer to a specific question, but I have no problem and can commit to taking this conversation away, and expect to update Kate Green and her group so that they're aware of the focus, and they'll hear this through engagement all the way through, which is currently underway. That's why I was trying to highlight that Shape Your City. People can go there and provide their feedback through that. That will be heard, and that will be reflected in future visits to council as that project evolves.
Okay, thank you. I understand it's complex, and we need to do a lot more work here, and I hope we will follow up through the whole regional plan process on this water issue. It's very critical, and as we all know, if water is polluted, it's almost impossible to clean up, so prevention is critical. So anyway, thank you for clarifying that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Aaron. This is obviously a complex issue that, as one of our speakers alluded to, the issue with the residents, obviously, and just for the general public, is they see finger pointing, right? And the problem with that is the finger pointing doesn't help anyone understand accountability. And at this point in time, I still don't understand accountability. Thank you for the presentation. I will note, Mr. Chair, that this should be posted on our website for the meeting so that it is accessible to the public and they can see that. But, and I agree, prevention, right? We need to prevent not only, the contamination, but the bigger issue for me is health concerns. We have boil water ordered right now in Hammonds Plains because the Department of Environment can't seem to figure out the problem with the groundwater system that was put in place. It was approved. It was supposed to be, a great advanced system. And this has been going on for many, many, many months. And for a seniors facility in particular, we're in a situation where people with dementia and Alzheimer's and family members are saying, wait a minute, how am I supposed to help my 85-year-old mom not know that she shouldn't turn the water on and drink that? And so the ongoing implications for the safety of our public is really concerning if we keep looking at, these what I would call antiquated regulations and technical guidelines that clearly don't meet the needs of where we're at today. And so, I think the inadequate nature of the answers that the public has been given was clearly identified by the three speakers that we had today, and many more, I'm sure, in their communities. So, I appreciate that this could be potentially a, conversation at the regional plan table. But quite frankly, and I think Councillor Daigle-Gammon agrees with me, it's not good enough. We can't keep kicking this can down the road. We have to figure out a solution sooner than later and I truly always say this, with every problem there's a solution. So, if it is legislative, then, so to provide the municipality with more powers over our water systems and over the ability to update a bylaw or to create these changes to protect the community. But at the same time, I'm looking at this thinking, how in the heck did we get here? Because this hasn't been something that was just thrown at us very quickly. Council's known about this issue. The councillor for the area has raised this many, many times, and I appreciate that she's trying to get answers as well. And I know that I'm rambling here, Aaron, but I feel like we almost need to take this away and create a quicker solution than just suggesting that, well, we should look at water protection and our lakes, within the regional plan discussion. I don't know that that's good enough. I'm not happy with it. And I don't think the public will be. And in addition to that, these groundwater and surface water concerns are continuing to be highlighted with developments across the municipality. Within 80% of HRM, which is rural area, dependent primarily on groundwater protection. So I'm just trying to, I guess, kind of get to the point of, asking you who, I don't think it's regional plan. Is this a GRIA approach that we could potentially discuss with government relations and say, maybe we need to create some kind of a working group with the Provincial Department of Environment and Municipal Affairs and Housing, because this problem is only going to get worse.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I'm, in disagreement with anything that you've said, right? I think immediate solutions would be preferred by everybody. I point to the regional plan because it's well underway. If we were to have a theoretical exercise where in which tomorrow the province were to offer authority to the municipality wholesale for environmental regulation and we were complete control, we'd still have to develop policy and regulation to enact it, which is what the regional plan is midstream on doing. So even if we had full authority tomorrow for all things environmental, we wouldn't outpace the regional plan. I point to it simply because it's underway and it's going to be stuck and landed. And I think part of one of the most critical parts in all of this conversation is the reaction and the feelings of the community. We're in community engagement on the regional plan. So there is an inbox, there is a phone number, there are individuals who are hoping and waiting for this feedback. I don't know what will come out of it. I mean, that's something that we need to take away and make sure that we are applying policy and regulation appropriately so that we meet the community's needs and desires, and so that we, can apply the appropriate solutions relative to environmental sustainability. They're complex issues, and they do need consideration before we can put the right thing in front of council. I think that's...
Okay, well, we're going to follow this up. That's my commitment to you. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor. Second time around, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this community is the only one with a net zero phosphorus bylaw, right? Yes, okay. So we're the only one, the only community with that. And really, as a result of the amazing work that was done by the Visioning Committee, and I know Maureen Ryan was involved with that, and, an excellent piece of work, and Alan mentioned it, and I think so did Dave. But, and, the question about how did we get here? Well, we kind of got here because of a site plan approval. And that's why, it was cloaked. Right, I just move forward, but to the community, we just feel like it was cloaked. That's kind of how we've experienced it. And until the appeal came out, we wouldn't have known about that. So intention or not, it's the reality that the community is living with. I guess that's probably the most tactful way to put it. But when we look at the bylaw, Aaron, it's better than having nothing. But we now know that there are some tweaks that are going to be needed. One of the things that the community has spoken about, and when we were doing some of the research, is what is the cumulative effect? So we have some significant growth happening in the community. I know that 2 or 3 other developments that are coming up. So, but they will be under development agreement. There's no other site plan approval, so at least it will be, front and center. But does the bylaw, even when you look at these studies, and I read those studies, it only looks at this one experience. It doesn't look at what is the cumulative effect, right? So if there are a couple of sewage treatment plants that are putting treated effluent into the lake, how does this bylaw, or is that a place where we need to refine the bylaw to say, what is the cumulative effect? We've got 3 already. If there's a change to any one of the plants, then does that change the net zero phosphorus? And how do we shore up? And I agree with, my colleague, Councillor Lovelace, is waiting for the regional plan. Well, you know what? We might be 2 councils away, and we might lose some of the history on this. We might lose some of the momentum about what changes are required. So what can we do now to protect for future development? Is there a cumulative effect on the bylaw? And should this bylaw be the subject of review, or should this bylaw even be something that we're looking at across HRM? Like, we've got all kinds of lakes. We want to protect all of our lakes. So is this a bylaw that should extend beyond just 14 and 17, the river lakes? And should it be across HRM? Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think it would be inarguable to say that we should be looking at and protecting all of our lakes equally. I think that's probably a pretty easy position to take. So yes, I think the plans probably need to be reviewed from an environmental lens and an environmental perspective in terms of watershed management. Those are complex issues. We have been focused, for all kinds of good reasons, on sewage treatment plants, that effluent being treated. I would also, I'd mentioned in the presentation, but I think it's important to highlight that if we don't, one of the greatest contributors is existing failing on-site septic systems. We will get absolutely nowhere if we don't address that, right?
Right.
That is probably the biggest contributor. And use of fertilizers, those are the ones that, you know, they're dumping phosphorus into the lake and we're not doing anything about it. We don't have control over it. We don't have those awareness campaigns and programs stood up. There's information available, but people would have to proactively go and seek it, right? So a holistic approach is necessary and required. That's going to require cooperation between the municipality and the province in terms of setting targets and guidelines and having evidence-based, science-based foothold on what it is that we're going to do that's appropriate in order to address all of those things. And that's and municipality-wide. Now, like I say, there are initiatives underway that can set those directions, and then we have a more granular approach through the rural plan and bylaw simplification, and where both of those are already programmed, and we've got direction from council to proceed with those. Anything that were to come along after the fact is we're going to have a double initiative to do, I think, a lot of the same work. So that's the only reason why I would, you know, maybe deter some specific motion. It's just going to be aligned with and included within that programmed work already. Does that answer your question?
It is an answer, probably not the one I wanted to hear.
I am full of answers no one wants to hear today. I'm aware of that.
Yeah, okay.
You good, Councillor? Thank you very much, Aaron, for the presentation. Obviously, lots of more conversation on this topic. Truly appreciate it. Thank you. Next up, there's 13.3 members of standing committee, none. Are there any motions? Seeing no motions. We do have it in camera. I'm wondering if someone could put it's about the minutes, put that on the floor. So, go ahead, read the motion for the camera.
Minutes of April 6, 2023 be approved to circulate it. Sorry, I forgot to press my button.
That's
Thank
okay.
you in the back.
Thank you. Second to that? And do we have a vote on that, please? All in favor? Okay, that is passed. Are there any added items? Seeing none. Any notice of motions? None. The next meeting is, I can't believe I'm saying it, but November the 2nd, 2023, and we have someone move forward on adjournment. So thank you very much, and thank you for all the presenters.